Human intelligence often requires the courage to be profoundly alone. That statement sounds unsettling, almost dangerous, because we live in a world that celebrates constant connection. From the moment we wake up, we're surrounded by family, by co-workers, by endless streams of digital voices telling us what to value, what to desire, what to fear. Society praises connection as the highest virtue, yet history suggests something different. The deepest, most original forms of thought don't emerge in crowded rooms. They are born in silence. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most provocative philosophers of the 19th century, recognized a paradox that still terrifies people today. Sometimes, the very act of belonging can suffocate intelligence. He argued that the masses don't just shape how we behave, they infiltrate how we think, down to our opinions, our values, even our emotions. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. Because the truth is, much of what we believe to be ours isn't really ours at all. It's borrowed from the groups we belong to, the media we consume, and the pressures we barely notice. But here's the terrifying realization Schopenhauer uncovered. The moment you step into a group, even a group of two, your full intellectual power begins to dim. Your mind doesn't just process ideas, it starts scanning for approval, adjusting to avoid conflict, rehearsing how to be liked. And while this helps us fit in, it quietly kills originality. You become less creative, less daring, less willing to touch the uncomfortable truths that brilliance requires. Most people spend their entire lives in this state. They move from family obligations to workplace dynamics, from social gatherings to digital entertainment, rarely if ever sitting in the raw silence of their own mind. Schopenhauer believed that's why so few ever glimpse their true intelligence. They never meet it face to face. They never hear their own voice unfiltered by the noise of others. And yet, there is another path. Some people, rare, unsettling to others, make a radical decision. They choose solitude, not because they hate people, but because they understand something society refuses to admit. Access to your own mind is more valuable than social approval. They know that their greatest insights, their most creative solutions, and their deepest clarity emerge not from brainstorming with a group, but from the stillness of sustained solitary thinking. This is why those who thrive in solitude often appear different, detached in conversations, quietly observing, never fully surrendering their independence of thought. They've paid a price for this clarity, the price of belonging, and they've decided it's too high. So, what exactly have they discovered in that silence that makes them so terrifyingly intelligent? That's what we're about to explore. In this video, we'll break it into 5 insights, from the masks of conformity that hide our real thoughts, to the art of being alone without being lonely, to the terrifying clarity that only solitude can bring. Because once you see what solitude reveals, you'll never look at intelligence, or at people who embrace it, the same way again. Schopenhauer's first insight is as unsettling as it is true. The moment we step into a group, we stop thinking fully for ourselves. It doesn't matter whether that group is a classroom, a workplace meeting, or even a conversation with a single close friend. The brain, wired for survival, immediately shifts gears. A portion of our mental energy is no longer devoted to pure thought. Instead, it begins monitoring the social field, tracking approval, gauging reactions, softening statements to avoid conflict, performing in ways that keep us safe inside the tribe. Schopenhauer called this surrender to the collective mind, the will of the masses, and he didn't see it as harmless. He saw it as a kind of intellectual suicide. Because while groups are useful for stability, they quietly dismantle our ability to think with originality. Opinions blur into consensus. Values start to look like mirrors of the people around us. Even emotions, what we laugh at, what we rage against, what we fear, begin to echo the crowd more than the individual. Think about it. Have you ever felt yourself holding back an unpopular opinion in a group? Not because you doubted it, but because you didn't want the social weight that came with saying it aloud. That pause, that instant self-censorship, is the mind bowing to the will of the masses. Multiply that small moment by thousands of interactions across a lifetime, and the result is chilling. Most people never discover what they actually think. They live on borrowed thoughts, recycled through the collective, mistaking them for their own. This is why Schopenhauer believed that groups make us less creative, less daring, and less capable of chasing uncomfortable truths. Innovation rarely emerges from a committee. Radical honesty never survives a crowded dinner table. The deeper the groupthink, the shallower the thought. And yet, this isn't about rejecting human connection altogether. It's about seeing what happens when belonging becomes more important than clarity. Intelligent people recognize the price of this trade, and many decide it's too high. So they choose solitude, not out of bitterness, not because they're antisocial, but because they value direct access to their own mind above the comfort of fitting in. Watch how truly independent thinkers behave in groups. They often seem detached, even aloof. But look closer. They're not disconnected. They're observing. They're noticing how quickly individuals bend to unspoken rules, how the collective shapes opinions before they're fully formed. They refuse to let that conformity erode their independence. What looks like distance is actually discipline. For Schopenhauer, this choice wasn't arrogance. It was survival, the survival of original thought. To surrender entirely to the group was to commit intellectual suicide. To step back, to embrace solitude, was to preserve the raw, unfiltered voice of one's own mind. And this is where the terrifying intelligence begins, in the radical decision to stand apart, even when the whole world urges you to join in. If the first insight is about the danger of groups, the second is about the mystery of solitude. And here, Schopenhauer makes a distinction that most people never even consider. Solitude is not the same as loneliness. Loneliness is emptiness, the gnawing sense that something is missing. Solitude, when properly cultivated, is fullness, the overflowing richness of a mind that knows how to live with itself. But here's the problem. Most people don't know how to be alone. Leave them in a quiet room without distractions and anxiety creeps in. Boredom gnaws at them. Thoughts spiral into worry or restlessness. They reach for their phones, the TV, anything that will drown out the silence. For them, solitude feels like punishment. Why? Because they've never built an inner life capable of entertaining, sustaining, or comforting them. Schopenhauer observed that intelligent people are different. They've developed the art of being alone without being lonely. They don't see solitude as exile, they see it as homecoming. Where others panic in silence, they thrive. Where others scramble for company, they immerse themselves in the richness of their own minds. How? Through cultivation. Schopenhauer called it the world as representation, the ability to generate entire universes inside consciousness. Books, philosophy, art, imagination, these become companions, teachers, endless wells of fascination. For someone who has cultivated the inner world, solitude is never empty. It's crowded with ideas, conversations, discoveries, and creative sparks. Consider the difference. The person unprepared for solitude sits alone and feels trapped. Their thoughts turn restless. Why am I here? What should I be doing? Why do I feel so empty? The silence is unbearable because their inner world is shallow. Now picture the solitary thinker. They open a book and are instantly in dialogue with the greatest minds in history. They step into their imagination and explore possibilities that others never dream of. They sit in stillness and, instead of boredom, they encounter ideas so deep they can spend hours chasing them. The silence is not punishment, it's invitation. This contrast terrifies those who cannot imagine it. They look at the person content in solitude and see something threatening, even alien. How can you stand being alone, they ask. But what they really mean is, how can you find fullness where I only find emptiness? That difference is the dividing line between loneliness and solitude, between a shallow life and an inner richness. Of course, this kind of solitude doesn't appear automatically. It demands deliberate cultivation, deep reading instead of passive scrolling, systematic thinking instead of scattered distraction, creating meaningful work instead of consuming endless noise. Over time, this effort transforms the inner world into something far more fascinating than most social interactions or media distractions. Schopenhauer himself spent decades developing this inner capacity. He wasn't running from society, he was building a universe within. For him, solitude wasn't withdrawal, it was expansion, a chance to step into a vast interior space where ideas and beauty and understanding multiplied endlessly. And this is the secret that intelligent people discover. The richest company is not always external. Sometimes, the most rewarding companion is the cultivated mind itself. In solitude, they are never truly alone. They are surrounded by their thoughts, their imagination, and the silent conversations with thinkers who came before them. So the next time you see someone who thrives in solitude, resist the easy label of loner. Look closer. You might be witnessing someone who has turned inward and discovered a world more fascinating than the one outside. Where others panic in silence, they find a symphony. Where others see emptiness, they see infinity. This is the art of being alone without being lonely, and it is one of the most terrifying forms of intelligence of all. If solitude provides the soil, then intellectual independence is the seed that grows within it. Schopenhauer believed that true genius requires the courage to wander into uncharted territory, places that group thinking could never allow. Because when we are constantly surrounded by others, our ideas are quietly fenced in by consensus. We think only as far as seems reasonable, only as far as others will tolerate, only within the invisible boundaries of what is already accepted. This is why solitude is so crucial. Alone, the mind is free to wander into the strange, the impractical, the absurd. And it is often in those very places that originality is born. Great discoveries rarely begin as ideas that everyone nods along to. They begin as thoughts that seem almost ridiculous. Thoughts that can't be explained in a casual conversation. Thoughts that take weeks, months, or years of silent pursuit before their brilliance becomes clear. Think of Newton, who developed the foundations of modern physics not in crowded lecture halls, but during long, solitary periods of study and reflection. Think of Darwin, wandering alone through nature, quietly piecing together a theory of evolution that would shake the foundations of science. Think of Einstein, working in obscurity at a patent office, developing a theory of relativity that seemed unimaginable to his peers. Each of these breakthroughs required not only intelligence, but a kind of intellectual defiance, the willingness to think thoughts no one else was thinking. And here lies the paradox. The very ideas that transform the world often begin as ideas too strange for the world to accept. To pursue them requires courage, because in solitude there is no external validation, no nodding approval, no instant confirmation that you're on the right path. There is only uncertainty. Maybe the idea is brilliant, maybe it's worthless. Only time will tell. Most people cannot tolerate that ambiguity. They need the safety of group affirmation. But those who endure it, those who can think in silence without the comfort of consensus, are the ones who occasionally strike gold. This is why Schopenhauer admired those who embrace solitude. They were not simply avoiding others. They were protecting the conditions for originality. They understood that their best contributions to humanity would not come from repeating what was already accepted, but from venturing into the mental wilderness, exploring what no one else dared to explore. To the outside world, this independence can look arrogant, even reckless. But in truth, it is the purest form of courage, the willingness to think without permission, the willingness to follow curiosity into the dark, trusting that somewhere in the unknown lies a spark of discovery. And that is the third mark of terrifying intelligence, intellectual independence. A mind that does not wait for approval, does not bend to consensus, and does not fear being alone with its own strange, untested ideas. Because sometimes it is the very thought that seems most impossible that ends up reshaping what we call reality. If intellectual independence is the courage to think differently, then the economics of attention is the discipline that protects that courage. Schopenhauer believed that mental energy is finite. Every day, each of us has only so much focus, so much clarity, so much inner fire to spend. And the uncomfortable truth is this: most people squander it without ever realizing what it costs. Think about what happens in even the simplest conversation. On the surface, it looks like words being exchanged, but beneath that, your brain is processing far more. You're tracking body language, tone, unspoken agendas, emotional undertones, and hidden expectations. You're weighing what to say, what not to say, and how it will be received. This isn't effortless. It's cognitively expensive. Each social interaction, no matter how pleasant, consumes mental energy you'll never get back. Now, for the average person, that cost goes unnoticed because they're used to spreading their attention across dozens of shallow interactions each day. But intelligent people who value depth notice something different. They recognize that the same energy spent on small talk Networking events or obligatory social rituals could instead be invested in thinking, learning, creating, or exploring ideas that truly matter. And so they make a deliberate calculation. Cut out what drains, preserve what sustains. Schopenhauer himself was famous for this. He structured his entire life around protecting his attention. He took long, solitary walks every day, ate most of his meals alone, and avoided the endless churn of social obligations that most people accept without question. To outsiders, he seemed antisocial, even eccentric. But what looked like strangeness was actually strategy. He was conserving his most precious resource, his mind, for the work that mattered most to him. This is the essence of the economics of attention: depth over breadth, quality over quantity. The intelligent person doesn't want 100 shallow connections that scatter their energy. They want a few profound ones, and then the rest of their focus is reserved for their craft, their learning, their contribution. They understand that what you pay attention to shapes not just your day, but your life. And here's the challenge. Where is your attention really going? How much of your limited mental energy is being drained by trivial conversations, endless notifications, or shallow distractions? How much of your day is consumed by maintaining appearances in social spaces that add nothing to your growth? Schopenhauer's insight was brutal but liberating. Most people waste their best hours and sharpest thoughts on obligations that mean nothing. The intelligent few cut through the noise. They withdraw, not to reject the world, but to protect their capacity to create something meaningful for it. This is why they seem cold at times, why they decline invitations, why they value solitude. They are not hoarding their attention out of selfishness. They are investing it carefully, knowing that every ounce of mental energy spent on the shallow is energy stolen from the deep. And in the long run, the deep is where wisdom, originality, and lasting impact are found. If the economics of attention explains how intelligent people protect their energy, then philosophical vision explains what they gain in return. Because solitude doesn't just sharpen thought, it changes perception. Step far enough away from the noise of social life, and suddenly, patterns emerge that others can't even see. To someone immersed in constant interaction, life feels urgent and important. The daily dramas, the shifting alliances, the endless chatter, it all seems to matter. But the person who has spent time in solitude begins to notice something unsettling. Much of it is trivial. Social life repeats the same cycles, driven not by wisdom, but by fear and desire. People chase approval, defend illusions, and play the same roles over and over, convinced it's all unique. From the outside, it looks like a loop. This clarity is liberating, but also isolating. Once you've seen through the repetition, it becomes difficult to pretend, to nod along as if rituals that mean nothing are deeply important, to smile at conventions you know are built on insecurity and performance. Intelligent people who choose solitude often pay this price. They trade social ease for intellectual honesty, popularity for authenticity, comfort for clarity. And yet, this trade creates a profound advantage. With distance comes perspective. They begin to see the hidden mechanics of human behavior, the games people play without realizing it. They see how fear of being forgotten drives attention-seeking, how envy hides inside criticism, how conformity disguises itself as morality. This isn't cynicism, it's clarity. They don't hate humanity, they simply see it more clearly than most. Schopenhauer called this the suffering of existence, the recognition that much of human activity is driven by unconscious forces rather than conscious choice. But he also believed that those who embrace solitude can transform this suffering into wisdom. By refusing to be blinded by illusions, they prepare themselves to engage with the world on a deeper level. And this is the final paradox. Solitude is not an escape from the world, it is preparation for it. The person who has cultivated depth in silence can return to society with insights, creations, and clarity that others cannot provide. They are not rejecting connection, they are refining it. They are not avoiding contribution, they are preparing for the kind that matters most. This is why intelligent people who embrace solitude appear mysterious, even threatening. Their calm presence unsettles others because it suggests they've tapped into something rare, independence from the endless cycle of validation and conformity. They don't need the crowd to feel complete, and that independence is dangerous in a world that thrives on control. So the next time you see someone content in their own company, don't mistake them for a loner. You may be looking at someone who sees the world with terrifying clarity, someone who has chosen authenticity over popularity, truth over comfort, depth over performance, someone who has discovered that solitude is not emptiness but power. Because in the end, the highest forms of human intelligence are not found in the crowd. They are forged in silence, where the mind is finally free to see what others miss. So what do we make of all this? On the surface, solitude looks like withdrawal. It looks like stepping away from the crowd, rejecting connection, even running from life itself. But Schopenhauer revealed the paradox. What appears to be escape is often the birthplace of wisdom. The very silence that others fear becomes the ground where clarity, creativity, and originality take root. The 5 insights we've explored aren't just abstract philosophy, they are a map of the solitary mind. First, the refusal to commit intellectual suicide by surrendering to groupthink. Second, the art of being alone without being lonely, turning the inner world into a home rather than a prison. Third, the fierce independence that allows genius to wander into uncharted territory. Fourth, the discipline to guard attention as a scarce and sacred resource. And finally, the vision to see patterns in human behaviour that most people will never recognise. Each of these traits is born in solitude, and together they form a kind of intelligence that is as rare as it is unsettling. Because it doesn't play by the usual rules, it doesn't need constant approval, it doesn't bend to consensus, it doesn't fear silence, and that independence is why it feels both powerful and threatening to those who rely on the crowd to feel whole. The truth is, these people are not running from connection. They are running toward intelligence. They are not rejecting humanity. They are preparing to contribute something more meaningful to it. And what they discover in that silence, their insights, their clarity, their creations, may be exactly what the world needs most. So now the question turns to you. Have you ever experienced the kind of clarity that only comes when you're alone? Have you ever felt the difference between the borrowed thoughts of the crowd and the raw, unfiltered voice of your own mind? If you have, you know why solitude is not emptiness. It's power. And if you haven't, perhaps it's worth stepping into the silence to find out. Because in the end, the deepest intelligence, the most terrifying originality is waiting there, inside your own mind if only you have the courage to listen.